little town, all of these people piling in, these voting places. There's a lot to do, a lot of anxiety about the election. It's extremely hot, and tempers are rising, and this has gone on about 6 hours. This election has gone. The deputies are beginning to be upset because they see people voting that they've never seen vote before, and they see people voting against them, and so they're starting to get upset. Well, this building is actually still there. That was precinct number 11. It was the Athens Waterworks building, where it was a utility, where you went in to pay your water bill. And folks were just kind of coming in and out. There were 2 deputies there, Miss Wilburn and Wendy Wise. Wendy was a little short deputy, and they called him Wendy. But that wasn't his name, it was his nickname because he couldn't keep his mouth shut. And you will see in a minute how he earned that name. Also, there were 2 poll watchers, Shy Scott and Ed Vestal, and so they were in there. They were watching everything happen, and the deputies were in there. Crowded room, crowded building with the polling going on. People were lining up, going in the door there, right in the middle of the scene there. That's actually Wendy right there in the middle in front of the door. I'll explain that picture in just a minute. In walks a black gentleman. In walks a black gentleman who, and his name all of a sudden, he's a pivotal character, and I've forgotten his name. Gosh, it'll hit me in a minute. Anyway, he walks in to vote, and this gentleman owned a little cart, his own little business. He sold food out of, and hot tamales. I never have understood why people were buying hot tamales back then, but he sold hot tamales, very well thought of in the community. Tom Gillespie was his name. Very well thought of in the black community, very well thought of in the white community. Had paid his polling tax and was going in to vote. He goes in to vote. Wendy Wise is headed up to here with this election. He sees a black man in those days coming in to vote, and he grabs Tom and throws him out on the sidewalk and calls him a couple of racial names and says, "You're not going to vote in here today." Well, Tom, being the kind of guy that he was, he stood right back up, dusted himself off, walked right back in precinct 11 and got back in line. They said that Wendy turned and saw him come back in, and he just blew up and literally took his .45 pistol out and fired. Folks jumped between them and pulled Wendy away, thinking he had missed Tom. And because Tom, they say, didn't even move at first. But then he slumped over and blood began to appear on his shirt. They called an ambulance and took Tom away. The GI poll watchers saw all this and began to realize this is not a situation we need to be in. If they'll kill a guy for trying to, shoot a guy that's trying to vote, they'll definitely shoot us. And so they tried to leave. Wendy said, "You're not leaving. As long as we have you here to say we had a fair election, however this turns out, we'll be able to say we had a fair vote here at Precinct 11. Well, Scott and Vestal, in the confusion of getting Tom out of the building, was able to make their way around at the very moment this picture is being taken to those plate glass windows and pressed against them until they shattered. And both of them rolled out on the sidewalk and stood up with their arms raised. And if you look very closely, you can see one of them on the right. You can barely see the other one right between those 2 cars right there as they walk away, yelling, "We're unarmed, we're unarmed." Well, good old Wendy, being the friend of the public that he is, comes out, and you can't see it. It's a little blurry, but he came out with his .45 waving it around. He points it at both of those guys as that photograph is being taken from the radio station across the road. And so that's frozen in time for us, that very, very pivotal moment. And then he waves it at the public as if he hadn't already made everybody else mad enough and says, "If any other SOB interferes with this election, I'll put a bullet in him," further endearing himself. So, Scott and Vestal get away. The sheriff hears about it. Mansfield hears about it. He says, "I'm losing control of this election." And so he makes a decision to pull all of the ballot boxes to the jail for safe and secure counting. Now notice I have not barely even mentioned Paul Cantrell, because a lot of these decisions on this day were made by the sheriff, not Mr. Cantrell. Now certainly they were somewhat in cahoots together, but Paul Cantrell, according to his family and according to what I personally see as a historian, was genuinely coming back because he believed in what he was doing. He believed in that type of government and felt like that was the way to go to correct the problems that his subordinate Mansfield had caused. So anyway, The ballots are all taken to the jail. Now, all of the ballots didn't make it, surprisingly enough. There were a couple of other encounters across the county, but these are the most significant. Most of the ones that made it back to Athens get to our county jail. Well, about that time, as that's going on, the GIs have realized if they'll shoot a man for trying to vote, that's what they're going to do to take this election over. And so they go down to the National Guard Armory and basically talk their way inside and borrow rifles out of the National Guard Armory and bring them back to the courthouse, which is less than a block away from precinct number 11, and begin to hand rifles out to other GIs while the sheriff, less than a block away, is getting the ballot boxes out of precinct 11. We like to keep our fights in McMinn County very close. So everybody sees where this is going. Now, what they did across from the jail is a hill, as White Street runs down into the downtown area, and the GIs, being good GIs, took positions on that hill overlooking the jail. Now, if you stood across the hill or the road that day, you could not see that. If you'll notice, there are some trees on either side of that picture. They were in full bloom there in August, and you really couldn't see down to the jail, but you could see the top of it. You really couldn't see anything or anybody specifically. And so when they start shooting, remember that. They're not shooting at anybody as much as they're shooting toward where the jail was. So Mansfield, Cantrell, all the deputies go back to the jail. The GIs surround the front of the jail. They leave the back open because they all agree we want the ballot boxes. We don't want to shoot anybody. We don't want to hurt anybody. We just want the ballot boxes back. And so they sent a couple of GIs across the street about 9 o'clock to make sure in the cars that were parked in front of the jail that nobody was in them if a firefight broke out. Well, as they were coming back across the street, some car lights coming down the street lit them up, and someone in the jail, evidently not realizing just how many guns were on that hillside, pointed a shotgun out the door and shot at those guys. Actually hit 2 of them. Well, when that shot rang out for the next 45 minutes, that is what we probably refer to as the battle itself. About a pretty good gunfight over about 45 minutes. But very quickly, the guys in the jail realized we have only so much ammunition. We can't get out of here to get any more. Whereas everybody on the hill, everybody's bringing them ammunition. And they had plenty more to spare. And so the shooting in the jail kind of petered off, and so the shooting on the hillside began to peter off. And it turned into an all-night shoot a few shots here and there, and then some yelling. The GIs would yell, if you turn the ballot boxes over with, we'll let you go. And the deputies were saying, well, wait till the governor sends the National Guard in, because you're all going to prison. And indeed, Governor Jim McCord, who was a Democrat, had been called by the Cantrell Mansfield folks, requesting the National Guard come to Athens. And he did make the call to mobilize the National Guard units out of Nashville, until an advisor came to him and said, Governor, we can send them, but when they get there, what side of the street are they going to be on? So McCord very wisely, being in an election himself, withdrew that request and just kind of let the chips fall where they may, which is probably a good thing. These are some actual photographs. Those are a couple of state troopers. This is early, because before the night was over with, there were no state troopers in the county. There were no Athens Police Department personnel in the county. All of them just disappeared. They disappeared. Deputies were, of course, all in the jail. About 3 a.m., some fellas allegedly from Meigs County, we blame all our problems on Meigs County, they show up in a Jeep, and they're GIs, and they're demolition experts. And they say, we can get those guys out of the jail. We have dynamite. And so they set a charge, go down White Street, toss a charge out, and it kind of rolls over between those trees in the yard and blows up. They go around the courthouse, come back down White Street, set a second charge. And I've even seen it as high as 3 charges, but I'm going to say 2. Throw another one over there, it rolls closer to the jail and explodes, and that's when the handkerchiefs come out. Now, the deputies began to surrender and come outside. as day is about to dawn. And this is when it really did actually get pretty bad. So far, no one had been killed. Now, we've had several folks injured, several folks shot, Tom Gillespie, some folks around the jail, but nobody had been killed. As the deputies are walking out, a lot of these citizens who had suffered under their heel decided it was time to get retribution. One of the deputies, as he's walking out, a citizen came up behind him and cut his throat. Luckily, it was not a fatal wound. Mr. Cantrell, was actually in the jail. Sheriff Mansfield was not. He had snuck out the back that night, crawled up the coal pit behind the jail, and was gone, as some of the other deputies did escape himself. But Mr. Cantrell hung in there all night long, and he walks out. And as he's walking out, it was witnessed that a GI, not knowing who he was because he didn't have his hat on, pointed a rifle to the back of his head and said, "I'll kill one of these SOBs right now," and pulled the trigger. And he had fired all his ammunition, the gun just clicked. People started saying, "Let's hang him." I mean, folks were that upset. But there was a member of the GI party, an attorney named Ralph Dugan. Ralph climbs up on an overturned car that you're going to see in just a minute, as all of those cars have been overturned up and down the street, and gave this very impassioned plea and basically said, "Look, if the governor comes in here today, we're going to show him that we have control of our county. And we're not going to harm anybody. We're going to be good citizens." And so that kind of calmed everybody down. They locked the deputies in the cells of the jail. And the day dawned. So there you see some of the deputies. That's an actual photograph of them leaving the jail. Deputies didn't wear uniforms back then. Actually, Mansfield had recruited deputies from all over North Georgia, all over East Tennessee. Most of them didn't even live there. So they didn't have a whole lot of fight in them to begin with. And there's some of them behind bars there. That's what we saw the next day. And you see the jail there right in the middle of the picture. You see all those folks gathered around there. It literally looked like a war zone. They had overturned deputies' cars. I think they set one of them on fire. They had shot out the power to the jail, and they had to go back and repair that. But that's downtown Athens on August the 2nd. As we are trying to work our way through what has happened. Now, at this moment, there are no elected officials in the county. This is the ballot boxes as they found them in the jail, opened and torn open, and around makes you kind of wonder when they're around the commode what was being done with them. But they were able that night to bring in more ballot boxes from out of the county.